All right, with that, I believe we are ready to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to virtual meetings and webinars. Today, we'll be discussing the tips and tricks for making these kind of meetings accessible to those who are blind, those who are deaf, or those with other forms of disability, and hopefully make the whole experience better for everyone involved. Today's webinar is presented by the statewide IT Accessibility Initiative, part of the Maryland Department of Disabilities, part of the Assistive Technology Program, MDTAP. Usual housekeeping items: the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel probably early next week. We do have captioning available. Thank you all for your patience as we got that set up right at the start of the webinar. I believe it is functioning because I see it on my screen. So if you need that on your menu ribbon in the main region, you can press the closed captioning button to turn that on. I did send out the slide deck today about 2 hours ago. If you didn't receive it, or for whatever reason you weren't able to download it, or it's having trouble for you or whatever, please let me know and I will send out or I will send you a fixed copy when I can. I will also be sending the copy with the recording, so you can keep an eye out for it early next week. With that, let's go ahead and get started today. So the first thing I want to talk about are what are the main tools for making meetings accessible. Closed captioning is the first one most people will think of. We're going to discuss automated and third-party captioning today. The second thing is narration, or as I like to call it, specific language, where we're ensuring that no one misses any important information that might be visible on screen, or discussing how to interpret things that you put on the visual aspect, or if you're sharing something like a slide deck or a PowerPoint, that you're communicating that information to every user you have attending your webinar. Third thing is accessible materials. We'll talk a little bit about handouts and slide decks and how to make them accessible. And then finally, we'll cover sign language interpretation, like coverage and benefits, and why you should use it and when you can do so, and when you absolutely have to have it. So starting off with closed captioning. First, I'll discuss automated captioning. It's more widely available. Pretty much every platform has it now. Google Meets, WebEx, if you're using the virtual assistant, I believe it's called, Microsoft Teams, Zoom. Originally, it was paid accounts and on request. I think as of last year, though, it is available on all accounts. You do have to enable it, though, on the user settings. The nice thing about automated captioning is for all of these, it's no cost. It's just part of the platform in general. It is only, I would personally estimate it to be about 80% accurate. It really struggles with proper names and acronyms. It can struggle sometimes if a user has an accent that's not familiar with, or if you're taking a lot of pauses like I'm doing, that kind of thing. So it's something, it's better than nothing, but in general, you're going to have to go back and clean it up for a recording. Definitely recommended for use in internal meetings and work groups, where if you're having these regularly or something, hiring a captioning service for those kind of things might be expensive, or it might be a time commitment, like you've decided to schedule a meeting that afternoon. You don't have time to book a captioner, and that's where having automated captioning is really useful. Best used for those kind of quick meetings, or for regular meetings that are like internal, just like a small team or something, where you know who's going to be on there and you can work with them to some degree. Now, third-party services, they have integration into WebEx and Zoom. So in the case of Zoom, like today, the captioner is sending the captions directly into Zoom. You could show it through Zoom. WebEx is the same. Microsoft Teams doesn't have that functionality. You can still obviously have captioning. It'll just go into another window. A third-party service usually has some kind of hosting platform where it will display in like a browser. Google Meets doesn't have it at all, so you kind of have to do the same thing in that regard. You'll post the link in chat and it'll send it to another browser tab or something. These do require planning and setup because you do need to schedule with the service, roughly at least 3 to 4 days in advance to make sure you have accurate time. You provide obviously information on how to join, and that you're also providing payment, obviously, the methods of payment and such, and also providing materials for them so that they know ahead of time what they're going to be working off of. In general, this version of captioning is usually more accurate, and it's also able to provide names of speakers. Now, that has started to change as of an update a few months ago. Zoom will now post your avatar or your icon next to the captions of who is speaking, or in this case, it has the C for the closed captioning. That's being assigned to someone for typing. Microsoft Teams, I believe, does that now to some degree. I don't know if WebEx does it yet. I don't use WebEx that regularly, maybe once a month or so, but it might be working to implement that feature as well. However, the nice thing about the closed captioning is, or the third-party service, is that they will type the full name. So if there was another speaker today and I handed it over to him or her or them, the captioner would put their full name first, and then every subsequent time they talk would show only their first or last name in order to help distinguish who was talking at that time. Definitely recommended for presentations and large scale meetings, especially webinars for a more general public audience. If you're doing any kind of live streaming, we'll talk about that later. Closed captioning, a third-party service is really necessary. I do strongly recommend that you avoid trying to do manual captioning unless you've been trained in it, because I remember one of the early presentations I did on this topic, I estimated it to be 160, 170 words per minute, and the captioner then actually told me it's upwards of 220. So, you definitely need a really high typing speed. They also will usually use special software and keyboards to allow the use of shorthand. So it's very difficult to do on your own. Now, you can do it, obviously, if you're doing editing for the recording or something, or you're having to create new captions for a video file. That would be a good time to go ahead and do it yourself, because there's plenty of tools available to do so. I believe we have a question. I'm going to put that up. Teams definitely integrates professional captioning. I use it regularly. I'm pretty sure that Google Meets does too. Oh, all right. I was not aware of that. Thank you for that, telling us that. The couple times I've used Teams with people, they've always sent us to an outside browser window for the captioning. And I hadn't seen it in Google Meets when we use it internally here. So, but most of those meetings are, very short and quick. So, or, scheduled not that far out. So we usually don't have professional captioning for that. So thank you for that. So update to this, obviously, is that now pretty much every platform has the ability to integrate professional captioning. That is good to know. Okay, now narration. So any visually presented information must be sufficiently explained by the speaker. This includes data such as table and charts. It doesn't mean you have to read the entire table or the entire chart. It means you have to get across the very important points of it. Why are you talking about this? You can't just say, look at this on screen, and then talk about something else or lead into what it means. You have to describe what is leading to that point. So make sure it's relevant to the presentation, like in explaining an action taken by someone in the photo, and make sure that you're using very specific language to communicate the intended message. One of the And prime examples I like to point to for this kind of thing is instructional videos for like navigating a website or a piece of software that they'll usually say, click here to uh, learn more about our services or something. Well, click here doesn't tell a user who can't see it, or if they're like alt tabbed and writing notes in a Word document or something, they'll have to go back and try and find what you clicked. So instead, saying something, click the About Us link, which is the fourth link on the navigation menu, to learn more about our services. That gives them information about, it's in the navigation menu and it's this far into that menu, very specific instructions to how to get to something. In the case of if I had more images on here, I'd be taking the time to try and explain those images and why I chose them, what relevance do they have, that kind of thing. So make sure to communicate all of the important details to users, for extraneous details or decorative things or additional data that's really there just for either providing more interest or providing a full picture. That's when providing the materials is going to be the main way you're getting this across. So providing that handout or those items ahead of time help users look into that information more on their own, but then also learn more about the topic without you having to spend 5 extra minutes explaining something in detail. You can really focus on what you're trying to get across, and then they'll have the resources available in order to go through the materials and get the full picture. Sometimes you do need to add extra detail if you have like a really complex infographic or something on this. In those cases, you will usually want to have either detailed descriptions either in the comments, put a comment on the element that needs the description. You can use the notes section. That sometimes works. It depends on if the user thinks to check there or not. Or you can add you can have a second version of your slide deck, let's say, and add a second slide in that's a description slide for that element. So, sometimes you need to go into that the detail for certain things. So keep that in mind, what you're describing. We had another thing. Okay. You integrate the captioning as well as offer stream text links for options. The stream text is what I've seen most of, so that's good to know that they are able to integrate the captioning. I will have to pass that along to the people who use Teams here. So thank you very much for that. Okay. Since we were just talking about accessible materials, first thing, handouts. So, PDFs, Office documents, any of these things. Very, a lot of the times, a lot of extra information is handed out there, or it's things like an agenda for a meeting, or it's, statistics that add to your point, but you don't necessarily have the time to go through any of those kinds of things. You need to make sure that they're accessible before you send them out. So we can view one of our earlier webinars on document accessibility. If you're in the state, we offer document accessibility training. There's a lot to cover here. So my first thing that I'm going to tell you, if you've not done any of that, is use the built-in accessibility checkers. It's a very good starting point for learning about this because it's going to take care of a lot of your basic problems, like adding alt text to things or having a heading structure or not having captioning on a video. It'll warn you, hey, you should check this video before you send this out, that kind of thing. So going through those errors, and it'll explain how to fix those, helps take care of at least a lot of the basic problems. So then after that point, once you've gotten comfortable doing that, you can start building on those skills and start making it even better and more accessible than just the basic checks. But without doing those things, we have a whole host of basic problems that stop people from actually using the handouts at all. So start there. Also double check the reading order. A lot of the times PDF and Word documents might not read how you think they read. Visually, you might think a PDF that you've organized into a flowchart is going to read correctly, but Adobe might assign a different reading order automatically going from left to right. So if your flowchart goes left, right, down, left, Adobe is going to do left, right. So you need to make sure that you go in and and double check that in Adobe. If you have Acrobat Pro, there is a reading order button. I believe it's on the right now. There was a recent update that kind of shifted where everything was. It used to be on the left, now it's on the right. It looks like a Z icon. You can press that and it will show you boxes around everything that indicate what order things are being read in with numbers. And it'll have a list displayed for you as well. And you can use that to determine that. Word and other Office documents are usually a bit easier in that regard because they kind of have a forced structure to them. And depending on obviously the layout, it'll always kind of go top down, left, right. Some things can interfere with that if you make any of your images floating, either behind or above text. Those will usually mess with the reading order and they won't fall where you think they will. So try to keep them in the reading order or with text wrapped around it so that it doesn't, it still is anchored to those things. There's other ways to handle those kind of things we talked about in other webinars. Not something I will get into too much detail today. A couple other quick things you need to remember: don't use color alone to convey info. If you're trying to highlight certain words in your text on screen with a different color, you need to use like bold or italic and underlines to help distinguish that. Same for like links. You need to make sure that they're descriptive, telling people where this is going to go, especially if it's a really long URL string, because data is going to get lost in that reading. So they might not understand where, they might hear the start of the URL, understand this will take me to this domain, but then they hear this long string after it and they might not be sure where it's going or whatever. So it's best to make words or phrases into the link text. Phrases is always better because it provides more info and it provides a larger click target, easier to find and use. But you want to make sure that they can distinguish the links from other text, same for emphasis, that kind of thing. Okay, slide decks. Kind of the same idea with reading order. There are a couple of points I do want to point out though. PowerPoint uses a reverse order. So in the selection pane, if you go to the Arrange button on the Home tab, it's after the styles. You click that, and then the selection pane, that's your kind of list of what's on that slide. And the reading order is actually going from bottom to top. Now, PowerPoint, its accessibility checker will warn you of that. If you use anything that's non-template slide, then it'll tell you, check the reading order. It'll just be a warning, it won't be an error. But it's going to say this might not be in the order you want it in, because as you add elements to a slide, it's going just to stack them on top of each other. So you need to go in and arrange that. It can sometimes affect the visual presentation. If you put things like on the bottom or something, they're kind of on the top layer, quote unquote. So it might appear in front of something you didn't want to. So also kind of try to avoid overlapping things. So you need to kind of play with it sometimes to see how it's going to be in that reading order, making sure that it reads in the order that you intend people to read it, but then it doesn't mess with your visual presentation as well. Now, Google Slides, their reading order requires manual adjustment. Usually this means you're going to have to put elements kind of in the sequence you want people to read them in. They don't really have a selection pane in the Google Slides. So either that, or you can just download it from there and open it in PowerPoint if you have PowerPoint available. So just something to keep in mind is that there isn't really a way to rearrange the reading order in Google Slides. It's kind of set in stone when you first put stuff in. So go through and double check it before you send it out. Again, always add alt text to images. That's true in Office documents and PDFs, but you want to do it in here. It's usually in format picture or format image. If it's something like the smart arts, then it will be in format shape, I believe. Whatever those format things, and then usually in layout and properties, there'll be an alt text box, and that's where you'll fill in that information. For complex images or data, so large tables or graphs, you want to use comments or another slide to provide a long description. You can sometimes use the notes section, but again, people don't always check the notes section. I'm not sure how often notes are used. I know, I use them, other people I know use them, but there's plenty of other people I know who have never used them and didn't know that they were there. So comments, from my understanding, what other individuals told me that I've worked with, are the best option, because the screen reader will tell them there's a comment on this, and then they're able to go and choose to listen to that. So that's why it's best. The separate slide, useful. Sometimes you do need to provide a second version though, so you don't have like a bunch of extra slides in your presentation. However, sometimes that can be useful for other people as well, because providing that long description really helps sometimes with getting your point across to users. So up to you and what you think is the best approach. Relevant question here. For non-tech savvy staff, what's your recommendation for testing color contrast type standards, or for anyone to test? In general, my thought process with that is try to use fairly standard colors, but you can also use, and I'm going to pull it up here. Give me just a moment. And hide that. Design. I have a lot of bookmarks, as you can tell. So what I like to use is this tool. So this is Adobe's color contrast analyzer. The nice thing about it is that if you're working with slides or documents or what have you, you can import colors and you can import a file. Usually you want to, try and select a single slide or something to use it for, but you can select like what page or what part of the file you want to use for this purpose. So very useful for just pulling up, quick color checks, and then it'll give you approximations of the text and background color. You'll have like two kind of eyedroppers to use to select that, and it will tell you the contrast ratio. And then you can just use the slider to find a color contrast that works for you. And it'll tell you, okay, you're now meeting the contrast ratio needed. It'll also tell you if you're passing for regular text, large text, or if you're using like icons or graphics. Useful tool. Probably the simplest one to use, at least. A lot of the other ones I used, you have to either add the colors manually, or they're eyedroppers, but they're inside a browser window and they don't really work with separate software. So that's why I like to use this one, is because I can pull in whatever I'm working with and I don't have to try and find the hex code or not, depending on the program. I personally recommend just always going for hitting the regular text. While you are technically passing for large text and cannot be passing for a regular text, ideally your text is quote unquote real, where people can change the font or the color scheme on their own, and it's not, part of an image or something. So, if they're, increasing font size on their own or something, you might not have enough contrast here, but they've changed it up. So ideally, I think it's just easiest to make it simple, hit all the baselines instead of trying to play with this like in between the two options. The other nice thing about this one is this. This color wheel is nice because you can use it for determining things like, oh, actually, no, I'm sorry, wrong one. This one, colorblind save. This one's also nice because it lets you pick kind of 5 colors to use, and it will tell you if they're in conflict with each other or not. And then, if you need to, you can change the color mode to fit whatever you're using, usually RGB. But the nice thing is you can kind of move these around and find colors. So like in this case, we still have a conflict now between A and C. So I can drag that along, see if I can find a color that's still, nope, and that puts in more contrast. So there we go. So now we have, now this is completely arbitrary, but it gives us 5 colors that we can use all together that shouldn't conflict in any regard. Obviously, you can choose to use 3 or something, but useful tool for kind of creating a theme. I do recommend using the templates in PowerPoint too. A, because it kind of gives you a set reading order that always works, gives every slide a title. And then B, usually they'll be fairly okay in color contrast. Usually, there are some themes that don't. And there are also times when the template makes, like especially on the title slide, it won't be real text, it'll be art. So when you send it to like a PDF or something after the fact, it will turn that text into an image, or it'll try and separate that out into separate letters, and it makes it harder for, to make it a single readable word in PDF. So you might have to redo it. I ran into that a couple times with certain templates. I think it was one of the gradient ones. I don't quite remember which one it was. So just double check things if you send it to PDF and you find that words aren't coming through as words, it's likely your template has made it into art. So that's kind of how I handle color contrast for my documents and such. Again, just because it's nice and easy to upload a sample and use that sample to pick out the colors I'm worried about. Okay. There we go. Making sure I got that back. All right. I do want to, as I mentioned before, recommend that you share your materials ahead of time. This was something I learned a few years ago from some of my colleagues who are blind or visually impaired. It's very helpful for them to have the materials to kind of read along, especially since screen sharing doesn't communicate at all to users. Anything that's on screen they can't interact with, the screen reader can't read. So you're really reliant on the presenter narrating on screen and having the materials in order to kind of follow along and fill in the blanks. So general recommendation is provide the materials roughly 1 to 3 hours ahead of time. Too early, and you might be a little concerned about people not showing up because they're like, oh, I got the materials, I don't need to, go listen. But it also gives you that kind of window for making sure everything, doing those final checks to make sure A, everything's accessible, B, you have all the information, and then C, you don't need to do any updates. Like, I'll need to make sure I update this later on to say all the platforms have integrated captioning now. So, you might see that change before this gets sent out to you the second time around. Reminder, screen sharing does not provide interaction with the material, so assistive technology can't interpret it. So that's why you want to share the materials and narrate them properly. There are a couple tools now for sharing material in an accessible manner. I'll show you one in the next slide. But for now, also make sure to reshare the material after the presentation along with the recording, just in case someone lost it or there were issues you needed to change, or just in case someone registered at the last minute and didn't get your email prior to the session. And then finally, make sure to ensure attendees can contact you if any issues arise. So this thing, Scribe for Meetings, is something that our colleagues at the National Federation of the Blind brought to our attention, and they use it for their webinars. So if you go to any of their boutiques, or if you went to their half-day seminar last week, you probably saw this. Scribe for Meetings, what it does is it translates on-screen presentations to an accessible format, such as HTML. Usually what you'll need to do is upload your slide deck ahead of time to your Scribe for Meetings account, and then register it in your webinar or your meeting. And then it'll join the meeting automatically when it starts, when you tell it to. And from that point on, it'll provide a link, and then users with that link can view an HTML version of the document as it's playing in your webinar, because Scribe for Meetings is kind of watching your screen and will change the content in the browser to fit what you're sharing. It also provides the ability to download that in a variety of formats. So people can get a text-only version, they can get a PowerPoint version, they can get HTML version, PDF version, any of those are available for download. They can also kind of move back and forth between slides. They don't have to stay exactly on page with you. So if they need to double back to take a note of something or copy paste something, it's available to them to do so. Currently, Scribe for Meetings only works with Zoom and MS Teams. I believe the NFB told me that they are Scribe for Meetings is working on integration with the other platforms. However, those are the two that it's currently functioning with, at least the official published version. So useful tool. We've used it a couple times. We haven't gotten it here yet. So I would encourage you, if you guys want to know more about that, you reach out to the Center for Excellence in Non-Visual Access, CENA, and they are available at the email access@nfb.org. I will put that into the chat later on, and they can tell you a bit more about it, or you can register for their boutique that's coming up at the end of September on accessibility of Chromebooks, and you can learn more about it there. Now, sign language interpretation. Technically, for live presentations, this can be considered optional. There is a heavy caveat with that. It is the highest accessibility standard, the AAA standard, especially for recorded material. It's not, I would say, common practice to have it available on those, depending on your audience. However, there are cases where you absolutely have to have it. One is speeches or public announcements, so press releases and such. You pretty much always have to have it there. It is also something like in the case of our webinars, we offer on request. The reason our disclaimer says we need 3 days notice is because the trying to schedule one needs at least that amount of buffer to get a service provider. So this is where it really comes into balancing, what you're doing and who your audience is going to be. Now, if you're having a meeting or presentation and you know that there is going to be a deaf or hard of hearing participant, you have to have it. You also need to make sure it's combined with captioning to give them the best experience. The TeleAccess Maryland program that's part of Department of Disabilities regularly tells us these kinds of things, and for all of our meetings with them, they've said it's always best to have both, so we would schedule both with them. It's also vital to making sure that they have equal participation, because if you're not looking at the screen and you're talking about something else, they're trying to get your attention, they'll have to use a ping or something, or something else to try and get your attention, or the interpreter will be the one who gets your attention. So got to make sure that you're leaving opportunities for that. One other thing to keep in mind, though, is longer sessions may require multiple interpreters. I think the longest you can get a single interpreter for is an hour, but anything longer than that, it's more common to have at least two kind of rotating. So you'll often see that at like the conferences, if any of you are going to the M-Enabling Summit in the early October, or if you're going to Accessing Higher Ground in November. We're going to that, by the way. So if you're going there, please say hi. But those presentations, you'll typically see two interpreters switching in and out, sometimes three, depending on, but the service provider will tell you if they're going to be sending more than one and if it's needed. One thing to keep in mind with sign language interpretation is it does require good spacing or the user ability to focus video feeds. So what I mean by that is if it's a webinar like this and we had an ASL interpreter, I need to make sure that their video feed is either the same size as mine or that it's the dominant one. So usually that would be done through the side-by-side view when you're sharing, so that users can kind of scroll in or out and focus it. And I would probably either turn my video off or make sure that they were spotlighted for everyone, so that the interpreter is at least either equal or the major focus of the presentation. If instead it's something like a live presentation or press release, that's where you need to have the camera focus having equal spacing in the frame for the speaker and the interpreter. So rather than focus solely on the speaker, you need to make sure that you're giving the interpreter enough space that no part of their message is cut out, but then also that you're keeping the speaker on frame because they're the subject matter expert or the person doing the announcement or what have you. And especially in the case of those who are able to read lips and instead choose to use a combination of those two options. So that's just the general best practice and a good way to approach it. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about the specific platforms. Some of this is now out of date, as we've learned just earlier this webinar. So take everything here, I guess, with a grain of salt, but still, there are some things I feel need to be mentioned that will be useful for people. First off, Google Meets. So benefit is it has free automated captioning. Two, integrated with other Google apps. If your office, like those of us in the state, are using the Google Suite as their base, you can easily share documents, slides, anything in your Google Drive easily and quickly with that. Kind of like how Microsoft Teams works with the whole Office suite in order to collaborate. So very useful with that, especially if you're using Gmail as your base, because scheduling the meeting, having a meeting and hosting it, very simple, very easy to do. Challenges. Now, the first one obviously is no longer valid. There's no option for third-party captioning. Apparently there is. So not as big a deal. One thing that I still am pretty sure of that it doesn't do is you're still unable to pin more than one video feed. So participant kind of has to choose between the interpreter or the speaker. Can't have both. They'll obviously always choose the interpreter. I believe you can pin for everyone now as the host. So, if you're hosting a webinar or something on Google Meets, you should be able to put the interpreter for everyone. In Zoom, that's called spotlighting. Recommendations is Google Meets, at least I found, it's best used for the smaller groups or for internal trainings, like, training sessions for your own team or for small agencies where, you're meeting for not your standard amount of time, or you're working with people you are already familiar with and you don't need to make any special arrangements for. Keep in mind though, captions, especially the automated captionings, will not be precise or clearly identify speakers. Like I said, they'll put the icon of your name next to it or something, but that's not always useful because it's either the first letter or the initials of the user, and if there's multiple people with that same initials, you're kind of distinguishing just by color then, so you might need to go back and clean those up after the fact. You can do all of that though in Drive or YouTube or what have you that you're going to use to host the recording. Drive now has the ability to add captions to videos and edit them, so very important, very useful tool. All right, Google Meet settings. The original image here got screwed up, so I do have a separate image here. The options needed for accessibility are user controlled and are located here. So you have closed captioning, that's on the bottom ribbon, currently between the raise hand and present now buttons, and then there's pin video that's available from the participants list, and you can also you'll have the mute button next to them, but then there'll be the pin video button. And oh, there it is. So let me jump to that quick. So here is an image of the latest version of Google Meets. So closed captioning is available here. Now it's been moved over to between your video turn on or turn off button and between your reactions button. So closed captioning is available there, third button in the list. Then in the participants list is where you can find the so that's where the so in the participants list, you'll have in call, and you'll have people listed alphabetically, or at least the host will probably be the first person there. You'll have a mute button for that individual, and then you'll have the pin thing, the pin button. If you're the host, you should have the ability to pin it for everyone involved. Now, back. So WebEx. WebEx, its benefits are that it has integrated meeting assistant that provides the automated captioning of post-meeting transcript. You can also assign a captioner or pin video there. It is widely available and used very broadly. WebEx, though, has historically been a challenge for screen reader users. It's gotten better over the last few years. The COVID pandemic really pushed them and those like them in order to really buff up their accessibility. But WebEx still proves to be somewhat of a challenge compared to other platforms. So just keep that in mind. It is at a usable level now, but I have found that most, or at least most I've talked to, blind and low vision users still prefer other platforms to them. Pinning video is still primarily handled by the host. I believe individuals now have the ability to post them or pin people individually, but it can be difficult for managing ASL interpretation and spotlighting. So just keep that in mind, is that was an issue we ran into a couple of years ago. And still from the last couple of times we've tried it, has still proven to be a challenge. It does still do multiple windows open for chat and Q&A. Now that has changed to some degree. Chat, I believe, is now integrated. I don't know about Q&A because the meetings, at least, we've not used it anymore. But it was an issue previously and can sometimes be a problem now. So the recommendations are, just keep in mind it can be more challenging to use. So be prepared to either coach people or bring additional accommodations through that. And again, provide the materials ahead of time for use. So in the slide deck, I do provide links to some of the settings for WebEx for how to handle pinning video or assigning a closed captioner or activating the automated captioning. I'm not going to run through them, but these are their 3 support articles that can help you walk through that process, and they should be fairly simple. I'm pretty sure though that the assign closed captioner and activate automatic captioning do require the assistant. So if you don't have the integrated assistant active, you'll need to go into your account settings and turn that on. But I think the closed captioning link will tell you where to find that information if you need to. Microsoft Teams, another common platform. Benefits like Google, it's integrated with their whole Microsoft suite and their features. So it works with everything they have built in. Very useful for collaboration on documents and projects and those kind of meetings. It does have the automated captioning with speaker attribution. So it'll put, the name of the person who's talking next to their captioning and such. Really useful for those meetings where you're just getting together that afternoon or something, and you need the captioning, but you don't have time to schedule a captioner. Challenges, it does need some additional training and shortcut knowledge to use with the screen reader. Microsoft has a whole article of different keyboard shortcuts that work with the screen reader to use it. So if you're going to use it as a one-off thing, you might want to consider using another platform that's easier to work with. But if you're going to be using it regularly, make sure to provide that information to someone who's going to need it. To that end, its UI is a bit more complex and can take a little bit more time to navigate something. Third part that has been struck as earlier this webinar. Thank you again for providing the information. I wasn't up to date on that. So we don't need to worry about not having third-party captioning in window anymore. Apparently it is a factor now. It's a recommendation. If you're going to be using this with your team or with people you know regularly, try to learn the additional screen reader shortcuts, to provide to users. So that you're familiar with them, and you know that if they're struggling with something, kind of have an idea to help, or just so you understand what they need. So if you need to change anything you're doing to make it work better for them, you can do so. And also, like Google, you want to use it in conjunction with their products, Word, Excel, what have you, because it's going to work best in those cases. Again, like WebEx, I provided the links for the pinning the videos, activating the captioning, and the screen reader support in the slide deck. So you should have that available to you before. If you didn't get it, don't worry. I will be sending the slide deck again when I send out the recording later. Now, finally, Zoom. Benefits. It does have both automated captioning and third-party service integration. It is now available even for the free accounts. The automated captioning originally was only for paid accounts, but as of fall 2021, it's now available in general. You do need to activate it in your settings, so your account settings, so keep that in mind. It does also allow users to pin multiple video feeds and resize them when screen sharing. That's that side-by-side view. So also, users are able to pin both interpreters. So if you have a really long session and you have multiple interpreters rotating, they'll be able to pin all of them that they need, and they don't have to worry about finding the person's video feed during the presentation. Other nice thing about it is in the meeting settings or webinar settings, users are able to set specific alerts for screen readers, and they can change the font size and colors for the captions. So they can really kind of customize it to what they need or want. Challenges, this is still proven to be a bit of an issue. Copy pasting from chat can be inconsistent. You also lose what's in chat after the fact. As a host, you should still have a record of it. So good practice is usually to pull out any links or any other information that's been shared in the chat and put it in the email that you're sending out after the fact. Another thing is screen reader notifications can interfere with understanding of content if the user doesn't know that they can change those, or that they have certain one on, like, any chat messages or something. If you have like a lot of participants, or there's a lot of activity in the chat, that can become an annoyance or interference. So keep that in mind. In some cases, it might be better to either like disable or enable chat on the fly, or if there's like technical issues, tell people message me directly or message the host directly or someone else directly, rather than putting it available in the chat, just so you're kind of minimizing interference in that regard. And then, to my knowledge, the breakout sessions cannot be individually captioned. That was an issue a couple of years ago. I haven't actually looked into if they fixed that too, but I know that historically has been a problem where if you have like a smaller session that breaks out from the main room or something, it can't have an individual captioner assigned to it. It kind of still works off the same settings. So recommendations is, like pretty much any of your other webinars, start ahead of time to give yourself time to set up any third-party captioning or interpreters. Best practice is, many of us, all of us here at any of these webinars mention the options at the start of the presentation. If you're working with a new audience, you might want to also mention the user settings that Zoom can do, and tell everyone, if you go to audio settings and then jump down to the last tab in that menu, that's accessibility. You'll be able to change captions, font sizes, screen reader notifications. So all right, so the required settings that you need to change in order to have automated caption and such are in your account, as I mentioned. So you want to select in meeting, the advanced tab, and then you want to check the closed captioning option, and then underneath it will also be enable live transcription. That's the automated captioning. So if you want to have that option available to you, you need to turn it on here. Next is also the option to save captions. That allows other users to save the captions for themselves. So useful tool just to let users grab the captions for themselves, rather than having to copy paste transcript or try and get you to give them the transcript, depending on that. There is an option for language interpretation. I haven't necessarily used it myself, but I know some other people in the office have used it for multilingual presentations. And that can be a very useful option if you need it. Quick video that I set up here a while ago demonstrates where to find this. So in your Zoom profile, you want to go to settings, and then in meeting, you want to go in meeting advanced. And there'll be the fourth option down, it's closed captioning. That's what you want to turn on. And then there's a checkbox underneath it that says enable the live transcription service to show transcript on the side panel in meeting. You want to make sure that that's checked. That's your automated captions. Then below it, as I mentioned, there's a save captioning that lets other users, rather than just the host, save the copy, and language interpretation if you have the ability to set up multiple languages in your presentation, or you need that option. So some very useful settings. There's other ones in there regarding like interpretation and such, ASL interpretation and what have you. So feel free to check those out as well. All right. Finally, here's some additional resources you might find useful for this. There is the support centers for all four major platforms we talked about. There is a link to our webinar series. On our YouTube channel, there is a link to the NFB Boutique series. If you want to check out any of their monthly webinars or their quarterly seminars, we often partner with them. Either we'll present at theirs or they'll present at ours. So we like to always plug them in. Then there's two links for helping with Adobe PDF and Microsoft Office accessibility to make sure that your handouts and materials are accessible before you send them out. Are there any other questions? We've got about 5 minutes left that we can use to address them. You can feel free to use the Q&A or chat. I have both up on screen. Another minute or so in case anyone has questions. You're welcome. Thank you. I'm glad. I'm hoping everyone got something out of this today. And if you have any other questions outside of today, please feel free to reach out. Those of you who are state of Maryland employees, your agencies can reach out to us for help with any of this information or with checking, your materials are accessible or for any other tips and tricks on this. Those outside of the state, I'm always willing to talk about accessibility with you. I can't, we can't provide services to non-state agencies, so we can't do any evaluations for you, but I'm always willing to learn and I'm always willing to share information. So with that, I guess that is everything. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, the recording will be available early next week along with the slide deck. So thank you all and have a good afternoon.